You don't want to be spoiled. Now is your chance to stop watching this video, go quick watch the D&D movie, and then come back and finish watching this video.
Absolutely. So yeah, spoilers. We're going to reveal all kinds of stuff. I'm Nerdarchy Ted.
And I'm Nerdarchy Dave. Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds.
All right, well, as the title says, there's going to be some spoilers because we're going to talk about Among Thieves, the new D&D movie.
Yep, we got to see it in one of the previews through Adam and Prime. So we watched it like 11 days before the official release or something like that. Pretty cool. But now we want to get into it. We kind of have our non-spoilers up. I'll put a card up here so you can check it out if you don't want to be spoiled. Now is your chance to stop watching this video, go quick watch the D&D movie, and then come back and finish watching this video.
Absolutely. So yeah, spoilers. We're going to reveal all kinds of stuff. We'll talk about characters, we'll talk about plots, we'll talk about some cool things that we've seen, and of course we'll put in there, our impressions of the movie.
So first and foremost, it has a hour and 45-ish minute runtime, so it's not like a super long movie. But, they pack a lot in.
They do indeed. There's, character backstory, there's character interaction, everything that you really want out of a typical D&D session, all packed right into them.
So we'll start right off with just our first impression overall. What are our thoughts on the movie? How do we like it?
So I really dug it. As far as I was concerned, it really put in a lot of D&D isms. It put in things that made it really feel like those were characters living in the Forgotten Realms, that typical setting. They brought in the Red Wizards of Thay, which, is a big staple within the Forgotten Realms, and the fear that goes along with them, which was awesome. You got to see some cool races, which we'll get to. We got to see some really cool spell effects, which we'll get into. So I really dug it. I give it, as a movie all over, like 8 to an 8.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Somewhere to the 7 to 9 range. We in the non-spoilers versions we kind of discussed this a little bit. Like when I talk about the places where it doesn't get like all the way up to like that 9-10 range is some of the acting, and I'm not even saying the acting's bad, but like it's not the same performance that you get from like a Russell Crowe in Gladiator or Mel Gibson in Braveheart, right? Even like Hugh Jackman's portrayal of Wolverine, So like those actors really made me feel like they were those people, right? And so in this case, it was good, and it didn't break any of the immersion. You mentioned, we got the spells, we got the monsters, we got the races, we got the magic items, we got locations, we got organizations. There is everything in there for a fan of Dungeons and Dragons that you would ever want. So there's plenty of Easter eggs, for you to kind of pick out throughout the movie. And, it was just a fun movie.
But with a lot of those mentions, those things that are there, I really also feel that they did it well enough that if you're not a D&D fan and you just went and watched the movie, that it was something that it was kind of like, okay, this is going to get mentioned. Not so much that it's like, you need to know what this is in order for it to work, but enough that, it's like, okay, well, that's a thing, but it's not a big enough portion that if you don't understand it, that you're lost.
Well, Ted, one important question. Is this redemption for December 9th, 2000?
Absolutely. As I kind of said...
I mean, it might not have been the 9th for you, though, but it was the 9th for me.
I don't remember when exactly I went and watched it, but I did, once we saw the trailer for Among Thieves, I did go back and watch the very painful 2000 of the D&D movie, and yeah, very, like, miles and miles above, what that movie was. Now we're talking about more than 2 decades later, so obviously the writing had the chance to improve, the technology and the CGI.
It's like 22 and a half years ago.
So, but, they were able to look at, they don't want to recreate that failure. And with D&D on the rise, with it being the most popular role-playing game that's out there, it's something that is like, all right, they need to make sure this hits home and hits home well. And so far, everyone that's, kind of talking about it has said that they've had a lot of fun with it, and it's getting good reviews.
Yeah, besides the technical points where Honor Among Thieves just blows away the 2000 D&D movie, I would say is the story and the script for sure, right? Like, you can have a great actor, but if you have a shitty script, like there's not much they can do with that.
Going to the 2000 D&D movie, you've got what essentially looks to be low-level characters going to go steal something from a wizard's tower. That doesn't make sense. You're not going to be successful in that kind of mission. Try to run that as a D&D game, those rogues are going to die. Whereas when you look at the plot and all of the things that happen, they get into backstory, they talk about these other jobs that have already happened. We have character sheets released on D&D Beyond for these characters so that you know that they are higher level, they are more advanced characters than a third level rogue. So the missions that they're trying to pull off are indeed successful.
Yeah, they're experienced and they kind of lay that foundation. And even like the very beginning of the movie, right away they let us know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it really does tie right into, those kinds of things. How many D&D games have started off with characters as prisoners? And that's what we see in the movie. And, there's how do you get into an escape situation? And, they go through that. And there's this whole plot and plan that's clearly happened between the two characters that are in prison.
And they didn't do the standard D&D trope of you become an adventuring party together because you all do the jailbreak together, but our two starting main characters are in prison together and they need to get out and they need a plan. And they execute a really cool plan, and it's kind of funny. But in addition to that, while they're executing their plan, they're also giving us the backstory, kind of like how they ended up in prison, some of the stuff they've done before. So it really does, and right from there, it just leads into the series of MacGuffin side quests in order to complete their main quest. They want to get back to Kira, Chris Pine's character's daughter. Edgin is the father, and that's their whole thing. But immediately, like any good D&D game, they run into complications.
And it's like one thing after another. And in order to make the story move forward, we now need this. We need to get to here. We need to do this. And of course, that means we need help, which means we need to summon an adventuring party, and we begin, pulling in these other side characters, some of which have already interacted with each other before. You introduce the druid and you introduce the sorcerer, and the druid is so out there, and the sorcerer's like, oh yeah, I know who you are. I totally was, hitting on you before, and she doesn't seem to recognize him at all.
Yeah. So the whole premise is kind of like, they get double crossed by one of their old associates, a member of their crew. He kind of steals Edgin's daughter and tricks her and betrays them. And, in order to get the daughter back, they're like, well, we're going to have to pull a heist on Neverwinter, on his manor, because he's now the Lord of Neverwinter. And and the reason why they incorporate the heist aspect is well, how are we going to get other people to work for us if we can't pay them? Well, the payment is going to be in the vault, but what we really want is to get Kira back. But also they're kind of thieves anyway, and pulling heists are what they do. So I suspect they want the loot as well, and also what D&D player doesn't want the loot.
Indeed, and he does have a loot, but that's a whole nother thing. There's so much backstory and interaction between the characters related to the previous heist that was run and then the current heist that's going on. So I love the banter, I love the back and forth, I love the connections. Not only to the world, but they show the greater Forgotten Realms map as they're going across areas, which is a lot of fun. And even if you don't play in Forgotten Realms, Dave and I have read a ton of Forgotten Realms novels. So to see that stuff kind of come to life has been pretty awesome.
And I'll say they do what we do in our D&D games, and we just gloss over the travel. We're not role playing it. Now we're playing it all out. We're going to go to the cool parts and do the cool things, and they do that in the movie, essentially.
Indeed.
So that's the general premise for the plot to start with. There's some twists and turns, but we're going to get there. Let's look at our D&D party.
All right, so first up is going to be our D&D druid. This is a tiefling by the name of Doric, and this is played by Sophia Lillis.
Next up, we have Egan, played by Chris Pine. He's a human bard.
So we have Holga. She's a human barbarian, and she's played by Michelle Rodriguez.
Then there's Simon, played by Justice Smith. And Simon is a half-elf sorcerer, and we know, he's a wild mage sorcerer.
So then our last character in the party, and he is only there for, a small portion of the time, we have Zenk, and he is a human paladin, and please forgive me, I'm hoping I pronounced this name correctly, but it's Regé-Jean Page.
Yeah, he's got some ties to Thay, and, the country of Thay, and some backstory there. Like you said, he's in for part of it, but then he comes back towards the end, so, they definitely set up, if they do a second movie, they could definitely bring that character back.
Yeah, Zank was really cool, and I feel from the fighting elements of the movie, his character most definitely shines.
So I feel like we've got one notable NPC that is kind of prevalent throughout the story.
And that's of course going to be Kira, Egan's daughter, played by Chloe Coleman. She's there as kind of the fetch quest, essentially. She is there to try and, lure the bard in to take her home, essentially.
Yeah, I will say though, I'm listening to the prequels on Audible, and she has a much more prevalent roles in those and is more active. So they are kind of in the prequels anyway, she's getting built up for something more. So possibly she could come back later on with more involvement.
So your primary big bad, your major villain is going to be Safina, and she is a red wizard of Thay, and she is played by Daisy Head.
Yeah, and Safina's going to be a big plot twist because, well, not really that big if you've seen the trailers or whatever. She's the true villain that is, working with Forge Fitzwilliams, and they're kind of in cahoots. But, the twist part is she just wants to murder everyone in Neverwinter, and Forge is going to steal all the loot and split with Kira. And, but the adventurers are we're kind of doing ice and we just want to get the daughter, but also they kind of want to be good guys, but not really want to be good guys, but they feel a need to be good guys. So they jump back in there and they're going to have to deal with this.
So this is one of the major things from the writing perspective that I really liked. The overarching plot or plan that the characters come up with is it's all about character motivation. It's about what the characters are looking to do, and the major plot point, the thing that saves lots of people, is kind of the afterthought that it's well, I guess we could, or I guess we should, so that they go in and actually do that aspect. So I really dig that because that from a pull it to the table aspect, that really dials down and can help teach DMs that you can write a character-centric story that is more than just a character-centric story.
What do you think? Was this a pivotal D&D trope moment where my character wouldn't do that, but in this case they did?
I mean, I feel like there's a lot of times that that kind of stuff can come up, and in this movie, and again, spoilers, when they're in the boat and they're looking away, or they're sailing away, and they see this moment that they've had described to them that majorly changed an area and brought Thay into more power than it had ever had before, and the characters turn around and say, no, I'm not prepared to give them that much power, even if it means, possibly sacrificing themselves, possibly giving up their mission, giving away the loot, turning around to go fight the big bad, really goes against everything you've seen in the movie for these characters, and yet they do it.
Yeah, I would say Doric probably has the most incentive to want to stop this from happening because, her motivation is, well, Neverwinter's kind of been screwing over the Wood Elves that adopted her, and
Yep.
she wants to fight for them in the Emerald Enclave. So, with that in mind, like her character would definitely be motivated to go back and take care of business.
And if she does, then we know that the sorcerer is going to as well, because we know the sorcerer likes the druid.
That's a good point. Kira is kind of optimistic and happy-go-lucky, so she would be inclined to want to help. Where Holga and Edgin have kind of been self-centered in their motivations up until this point.
But they're the ones that they're the center of this party. Like they are clearly the main characters of this adventuring party, and regardless of what you tell yourself, like during story arcs at a D&D game, there are characters that put themselves in the center, whether they want to or not, or whether the DM plans it or not. There are characters that move into that center position, and it might change over the course of a campaign, or it might not. But for this story, it is more about Edgin and Holga than the others. They're there as the help, the tag-alongs, if you will. Not that they're not awesome, because, they are. In fact, Doric was my favorite character throughout the whole movie. I thought, she was really awesome. So,
we went on a Sophia tangent that led to other tangents, but real quick, because we were in the middle of mentioning notable big bads, the villains. Forge Fitzwilliams ends up being one of them. He betrays them. He gets them thrown in prison. He wanted them all thrown in prison, but Simon managed to escape. Forge is played by Hugh Grant, and he is a human rogue, but he's definitely he's definitely the talky face kind of rogue that's very charming.
Yeah, he's the charisma rogue, not the Dexy rogue. Not that he can't do some of the roguey stuff, but he's definitely leaning in the bard direction of charisma as a rogue.
Yeah. Well, that being said, the bard doesn't cast any spells throughout the movie at all. So,
he does a little bit. You could see there could be moments that it looks like he's throwing inspiration or that kind of stuff, and there could be some things where maybe he's trying a charm person when he's playing his lute to draw attention towards him. But
feels like a reach to me.
It could be a stretch.
But I'm okay with it. I didn't need him to cast spells. Right. I didn't need the bard to cast spells. He does other important things throughout, and actually getting into the prequels, there's even more of that. But in the books, you always have more room for character development.
Indeed.
Let's get into our races, our monsters, our magic items, organizations.
Let's break it down. What kind of D&D are we getting out of the D&D movie?
All right, so D&D monsters that we saw?
So we had an owlbear, we had an axebeak, we had a mimic, we had 2 dragons, we had a gelatinous cube, we had an intellect devourer, we had a rust monster, and we got to see some undead Thayans.
Yeah, we don't really know what kind of undead they were, but we do know they got back up after they were killed, and they were a little hard to take. Well, maybe not so hard to take down. The one was pretty tough, and seemed to have some magical abilities.
Indeed.
So next up, what D&D races did we see?
All right, so there was quite a lot, and you got to see some of the non-standard races. We got to see humans, half-elves, we got to see dwarves, but the cool things that, in my opinion, that were fun, you got to see some Dragonborn, you got to see an Aarakocra, and you got to see a Tabaxi, as well as a Tabaxi, baby or infant.
Cub, yeah. And of course there was halflings and elves as well, and humans. I guess we have to mention humans. So they were all in the mix.
So next up is going to be D&D organizations, which I feel like this is, very much a Forgotten Realms kind of thing. So who did we get to meet or encounter in the D&D movie?
So we got the Absolution Council right in the very beginning. We got the Emerald Enclave. We got the Red Wizards of Thay. We got Harpers.
So we had Cult of the Dragon, the Elk Tribe, as well as the Grey Hand. So all things that are already steeped within Forgotten Realms lore that, you could go and research and say how do I add these into my game?
Yeah, and the Harpers and the Red Wizards of Thay, I would say, were the most prominent and important organizations in the sense that, Red Wizards of Thay, bad guys. Harper's
Good guys.
is a huge motivation for the Edgin character
Mm-hmm.
because he used to be a Harper. Matter of fact, the Zent character is also a Harper. But you know, when Edgin's wife died at the hands of the Red Wizards, he totally turned his back on the Harpers. He was done with them. You know, he blamed them as well as himself for the loss of his wife. You know, and that's kind of like what turned him away from doing good anymore.
You know, and again, a great backstory moment, a great character-driven moment, and we get to see a character arc of someone who was a good guy go to doing the wrong thing, and then moving back towards being a good guy again over the course of the movie. Perfect redemption arc. And a perfect D&D story, to play along with it.
And there's also some really good foreshadowing with Zenk beforehand, where he's like, "Hey, you're a Harper. I know you're a Harper, and you're going to do the right thing in the end."
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of had that like foreshadowing that at the end of the day, Edgin was going to do what was right.
Mm-hmm. He basically had to renew his vows of Harper because he had to swear by the Harper tome. And it's like, all right, we know that when he does that, it's a moment of, all right, he promises that he's going to give the fortune to the people of Neverwinter. And it's like, all right, well, that there's going to be that turmoil that once they steal the treasure, what are they going to do with it? And that that's going to be that crux moment where the character is going to have to make a decision. Does he honor his oath and become a good guy again, or does he continue down a darker path? And that's that moment, and you're waiting for it. As soon as he makes that vow, it's going to happen.
So one of the things I will say from the trailer, it's kind of funny, but when Doric is like, "So what do you do?" And he's like, "I make plans." And he's like, "Well, we have the plan." And she's like, "Well, you have the plan. What do we need you for now?" "Well, if that plan doesn't work, I make another plan."
So you make plans to fail?
Yeah, essentially. But you do see him do a lot of shucking and jiving and then have to rearrange the plans a lot throughout. So he's kind of like the mastermind of the group, and he's the most tactical.
So you mean Plan C is like Plan A and Plan D is like Plan B?
Yeah, but they're different.
Again, great moments, great lines. So it's again a very well written script. But there's so many things like that are great, as I would call them, table moments. Interactions between characters that are being done and said by people that have built camaraderie, whether they be the off comments that you really wouldn't say, but the player says it anyway. It's just laugh out loud moments. That really made the D&D movie shine because it was D&D.
So we did get some notable mentions from famous characters in the Forgotten Realms and kind of not in the Forgotten Realms, right? Some of them got sucked into the Forgotten Realms for this. Illuminster, turns out, is Simon is a descendant of Illuminster, right? And it's such a brief mention in the movie, and the prequels get into it a little bit more. And then you have Mordenkainen's arcane seal that's placed on the vault that they have to break into. So we get this mention of this individual that is technically from Greyhawk, but I'll let it slide.
But we also get the D&D, the D&D cartoon adventuring party. They don't speak. You don't ever get to hear their name. And I saw the moment in the trailer, and I really thought this was going to be one of those things of you have to really be on the watch for it.
You have to freeze frame, to find.
But no, there were multiple instances, where you got to see them, once they're in the arena, they're one of the competing parties. And it's all right, well, I wonder what this means. Does this mean we're going to get something more with them? Are we going to see some kind of, thing related to those characters? But we see Bobby pick up the axe. We see the party collected into a cage thinking that they had won. They had made it to the center first. There's all these things that come up. So it's not a you gotta pause and you gotta wait for it. there's enough opportunities. You might not see them all, but you can't miss them.
Yeah, then there's another party actually that is in Wild Beyond the Witchlight, and they're also from the cartoon, but they're also from previous adventures and modules and stuff as well. There's a name of the group, and I can't recall it right off the top of my head, but they were in there as well.
Okay. So next, let's talk about some things that they really brought. As far as I'm concerned, real rules terms that were brought into just regular, speak within the realms, and I thought that they did a really good job with it. They brought up attunement because they have to find a magic helm, and Simon has to attune to it in order to be able to break, Mordenkainen's arcane seal, the attunement gets mentioned multiple times, as well as they mentioned wild shape, which clearly we have a druid in the party, so a druid can turn into a wild animal, but we know that Safina somehow has the ability to detect it, which I think is kind of an interesting thing because really, like, mechanically, there's nothing that I'm aware of other than, like, true sight, but then she would be able to, like, point to it like, that's not a fly.
Yeah.
But she detects that there's, some kind of wild shape in the area, and, like, it's used throughout, the conversation, and that's so, like, it is a term, like, people know about it. So, like, I really thought that was kind of a cool thing to see these very D&D terms used in just casual conversation.
They did a very good job of bringing them in and introducing these concepts and conversations without over-explaining it. I feel like when you over-explain stuff like this, you start to lose the audience. They don't really care that much.
It breaks immersion.
It breaks immersion. But if you can just, like, thread it throughout, then people start figuring out through context what these things mean. And, and like you said, it just feels natural.
All right, so we saw a lot of spells within the movie, but with having, paladin, sorcerer, druid, wizard, bard, not that we saw his spells, but, like, caster heavy, so spells should happen.
And they did for sure. We saw so many spells. We saw Bigby's Hand, Green Flame Blade, Mage Hand.
We saw Magic Missile, Maximilian's Earthen Grasp, as well as Misty Step.
There was Prestidigitation, Reverse Gravity, and Shield.
We got Speak with Dead, Thunder Wave, Time Stop,
Transmute, Rock to Mud, Meteor Swarm,
Avard's Black Tentacles, and Animate Object.
So there are plenty of D&D spells in there. Although I might argue that the Maximilian's Earthen Grasp really was just a reflavored Bigby's Hand because it does go toe to toe with an actual Bigby's Hand. And both of them were kind of flavored in a cool way. One looked like a very demonic looking hand, and the other one looked like it was made of stone and rock.
And I would say that the meteor swarm was probably Melf's minute meteors because it wasn't annihilating the party, because we know how much damage, a meteor swarm is supposed to do. And there were not buildings and whatnot destroyed. It was not leveling the player characters, or the main characters, if you will. So I really don't feel that was something that was being done to the adventurers.
Yeah, because it would have been more like nuking the city.
Yeah. We know how big of an impact that hits. So I really feel like Safina just did that to be like, oh, let me just show how powerful I am, and it wasn't all that powerful.
Yeah. Well, with that being said, like, all the spell effects were fantastic. They looked really good. They made me feel like they really were casting these spells, and they all looked amazing.
Now, I will say, like, this is us trying to remember what we saw, and, like, we had some conversations afterward to try and, like, write some of this stuff down, and, like, I was there with my son, and he was asking questions, so we might have missed stuff. We might have gotten some stuff wrong. I know I'm definitely going to be taking the whole family out to go watch it again, so maybe I'll bring a list with me and try and, jot down to see if there's anything that we might have missed. It's possible that there were some smite spells that the paladin had used, but I don't really remember from that scene. So there's lots of options, but as Dave says, there was a lot of cool spell casting, and it was all done really well. My favorite of them, the statue that was animated with animate objects, was really well done, and I loved that aspect of that fight scene. And again, my son was asking, like, what was that? How did they do that? How can I do that? So, like, my 14, almost 15-year-old sees this stuff and is like, I want to do this kind of stuff in my games. So, like, I love it.
You're like, sorry, kid, animating a billion daggers with that are poisoned are way better than than animating a dragon statue.
But it looked cool, and that's far more important to some players, of something that looks cool regardless of how effective it is.
True, true, true. We did see one thing that would call like a magical ritual, or I don't know if it was the magic item or a combination of the item and a ritual, but essentially, happens, earlier in the movie when we get Zank's backstory. And then this is the thing that Safina wants to do to Neverwinter, and this is the whole like plot twist where it's not just Forge as the bad guy, but Sophia, who he's working with, and he's willing to sacrifice the whole city essentially to turn them into undead and hand them over to the Red Wizards.
Yeah, so beckoning death, is that thing. I don't know if it's the ritual, if it's the magic item, but I think it's definitely all encompassed. Safina really wanted to get this, evil horn out of, the Harper's treasure trove. That's pretty much why, they were trying to, to help out here. And all in all, to make all of this happen so that she can get power, kill all of these people, and increase the overall power of the Thayan Empire.
Yeah, and we really never got the name of that item in the movie, right? I've heard it referred to as the Horn of Orcus, but I think that's a thing from Critical Role. But, it was just the MacGuffin that they needed to really kick off all the other MacGuffins and tropes and plots that were going to happen afterwards.
And, if the players don't ever get access to the item, then you might never know what that actually is, because, like, if you don't research it, and they didn't have a wizard in the party, so they don't have, like, the typical brains of the organization. Like, their brains is the bard who doesn't research things. They've got a barbarian, a druid, a sorcerer. For a time they've got a paladin, and a paladin does seem to be, intelligent and very knowing about what's going on, but he's not there long enough to have all of the major impacts, that might be there. With him having a past in the Thayan Empire, he might know what that item happens to be. But, paladins have callings, and he was apparently called to go in another direction at the moment that he completed his quest with them.
So next up, we have magic items.
So we get quite a number of these things that we get to see. We've got, magic nullifying arm cuffs. Zank's longsword is, really something cool because it can, like, fling the blade. It can turn into a short sword and a dagger. So he can have a lot of fun. He can slash, further away than the blade would actually normally be able to get to. And he, like I said, he uses it really well.
He really does. Really does use it really well, and they were glad to have him with them.
Indeed, we got to see an alchemy jug, which was a lot of fun to see. A very common magic item, make an appearance, within the movie.
Simon has a bag of holding, and his Deathly Token. The Deathly Token was fantastic.
The Deathly Token was one of those great. Not a necessary scene, but it's something that certainly makes the movie and sells the aspect of what happens at a D&D table, where literally he talks to one zombie. You got 5 questions, or sorry, not a zombie, but a dead. He gets 5 questions. The one zombie, it was literally listed as yes corpse, because that's all it says. 5 questions asked, all says yes. Useless.
Yeah, and they repeat this several times, and also it gives like some of the backstory for the item that they're hunting and looking for and trying to get. So that all of that was comedic gold, especially even if you don't play D&D, but especially if you do. Like, this is absolutely stuff that would happen at the table, and it's things that the players and the DM would argue over, I'm sure of. That wasn't really a question. You totally asked a question.
Holga gets a Darksteel Great Axe that she liberates, as well as we get the Helmet of Disjunction.
Yeah, so the Helmet of Disjunction becomes one of those major MacGuffins, but also it's also a object that creates character growth in the Simon character. It's very important, and it also gives us some really cool visions from Simon's ancestors, where it's him trying to overcome his own self-worth and doubts.
With Simon very much being a sorcerer from a line that is strong with wizards, it's very struggling, very much a challenge for him, and he has problems attuning to magic items, which, there's nothing mechanically that would stop someone from attuning.
Spell.
So like it's kind of just amusing to see this whole thing, happening.
So there's this hither thither staff, which really is funny the way it comes up. And basically, Holga at some point stole it from a wizard and just gave it to her halfling love interest in the movie as a walking stick. And at some point, Simon's like, "Do you know what that is?" Because he got to they were married for a time, they separated, they went back, they visited it, and he had moved on, and he's like, "Do you want this back?" And it's also a hilarious moment because he's now shacked up with a new barbarian woman, and it's just so funny that clearly this halfling as well as Holga definitely have a type.
So yeah, very very amusing, very things that typically can only happen in D&D. To see these things. So utter hilarious moments to see this thing happen. The hither thither staff is basically like a dimension door kind of deal, and they make great use of this item once it's actually re-added to the party. But as Dave says, it was nothing more than just like a walking stick that she had given to her halfling partner years and years ago.
We also have a pendant or amulet of invisibility, which Holga and Edgin liberate on one of their heists. They kind of flash back to a smash and grab. Gets given to Kira, so then Kira can use it and also take place in their heist.
And then the last thing was the Tablet of Reawakening, which obviously it casts resurrection or true resurrection. Not really sure on someone who has died, but it's just like it's a one-use spell item, and once you do it, the whole thing just crumbles into dust.
It's a huge MacGuffin because really this is the whole this thing got them into the whole mess to begin with, right? So a couple things. One, we get a lot of locations. One of those is a Harper vault, and that's where they have to steal the thing. Now, Forge kind of puts the deal together with Sophia, and the rest are kind of reluctant, but then once Edgin learns this thing's there, he's like, "Oh, I can bring back my wife," and and that's the thing that motivates him, and that's the other thing. That's the other reason why he wants to get into the vault too. There is one particular piece of loot that he wants from there, and that is this tablet. And also, we had some foreshadowing with that too, with the Zenk character going, "Hey, if there's an afterlife, and she's in that afterlife, and you're going to pull her back from that." It's been a long time. She has a new life. Do you really want to do that? So at the end of the movie, he does use it, but, it's already been kind of foreshadowed, and he uses it to save Holga.
Yeah, so that was one of those things that was, again, really well foreshadowed, really, pivotal moment to be like, well, what are you going to do, in this situation? And it was cool to actually see that decision being made. Very cool, to see, all right, you've got players going up against a big bad, someone that's definitely more powerful than you, and somebody dies. To me, I felt true to heart D&D, this is what can happen, this is what does happen, and the bard gets to make that choice of all right, well, do I bring back my wife or do I bring back my friend? And you get to see this cool flash moment where he wants to bring his wife back so that his daughter and his wife can live together. And he realizes at that moment that his daughter was super young when his wife died. The daughter doesn't know the wife, her mother. To her mother is Holga. So to bring Holga back, that is what really makes it, sell the point of, I'm doing this for my daughter, not for myself.
Yeah, and it's kind of it's like an interesting dynamic they kind of bring about because they have this co-parenting situation where Holga's kind of adopted Kira, but Holga and Edgin, they're not romantic. They're just friends. and and companions, there's nothing romantic about it, and it just creates this fun, interesting dynamic, that's more complex and more interesting than just a simple love interest. So one of the things that's really cool is we get a lot of locations, right? Right from the bat, we get a prison, right? Revel's End. Then from there, we're going into D&D taverns. We're going into the Underdark. We're going into the Harper's Vault and Stronghold. We see a little piece of, Thay. We get Neverwinters. So there's so many locations that they pack into this.
And they do it well. We get to see a fight against a obese dragon, which I've never really seen before. Timbershard
Thembershard, and Thembershard is absolutely terrifying. And adorable at the same time. I don't know how it works, but it totally does.
It's a great scene, and again,
I'm not sure that dragon can actually fly.
So it's one of those things that it's hilarity for you to be able to look at dragons in a new light, as well as having a movie where they're not, oh well, we need to go slay the dragon and claim all of its hoard and have to explain all of this stuff and what have you. No, they run from the dragon. So utter hilarious moments that are set up by this massive dragon. Utterly great scene.
We also get a labyrinth as well, and an arena all combined into one, essentially, and more prison cells, basically. So there's so much of that stuff going on throughout the movie. In the trailer you see the black dragon. Really, that's all. You saw it all right there. There's not a whole lot going on with it, but it was cool, and it fit the way they do it. It goes back to the Speak with Dead, where they're retelling what happened to this helm that everyone's trying to get back to, and all the funny stories that come to it, and also all these comedic deaths that just happen,
which again are things that are very D&D. So I just adore it.
So I think in a nutshell, this has been a fairly long video. That covers most of it. There's probably some things that we glossed over or missed that maybe you thought was important. Feel free to discuss them down below in the comments. Before we do, I think there's some more people that we should just probably call out because they did a fantastic job.
So there's 2 directors for this movie. We've got John Francis DeLay
and Jonathan Goldstein. You know what? Based on what I saw, the final product, they did an amazing job directing this.
So we have 5 writers for this, and the directors are part of the writers. So John Francis DeLay and Jonathan Goldstein.
Yeah, it's kind of broken up between the screenplay writing and the story, but we're just going to list them all together. We've got Michael Gillio and Chris McKay as well.
So we have 4 writers that are part of this, and the directors are part of the writers. So you've got John Francis DeLay as well as Jonathan Goldstein.
Then you have Michael Gillio and Chris McKay.
So I want to say a thanks to these wonderful writers for putting together not only a great movie, a great screenplay, but a great D&D story. So I don't know anything about them, whether they've actually played the game, whether they have any history with it, but clearly they have some kind of understanding, whether they brought in people to kind of help direct things in a way that shares this experience that Dave and I have been doing for decades, with those that have never played the game.
They totally made me believe that whoever made this movie are fans of D&D and fans of the game.
So hey, you like the stuff that Nerdarchy does? Why not come check out Nerdarchy the store or support us on Patreon? Links are going to be down below.
So did we miss anything? Is there anything that you saw that we didn't? What are your Easter eggs? What were your favorite parts of the movie? Discuss them down below with the rest of the Nerdarchy community.
You want to help Nerdarchy appease that almighty YouTube algorithm, go ahead and like, share, subscribe, and as Simon does in the movie, attune to that notification bell.
Quick reminder, we drop new videos here on the channel several times a week, so come on back. But you can't wait till then, no worries. Up here, there's a card. You can check out the Thieves Gallery for the D&D movie characters.
So until next time, stay nerdy.